Happy to be joined on the podcast now by Anna Wolfe, an investigative reporter for a journalism nonprofit in Mississippi called Mississippi Today. Anna Wolfe has led the reporting on the story of misspent welfare funds in the most poverty-stricken state in our country. I might be wrong on this, Anna, but I think about 20% of all Mississippians currently live in poverty. And there's a burgeoning welfare scandal in the state that Anna Wolfe has been at the forefront of, and that is uncovering evidence that funds that should have gone to the poor instead have been targeted for pet projects for the very well-connected in Mississippi, including one of the most famous athletes in state history, Brett Favre, the Hall of Fame quarterback. In her reporting, Anna Wolfe has found out that the former governor of the state, Phil Bryant, is alleged to have helped coach Favre and others with the correct way to construct and word a grant application to pass muster to get state welfare funds targeted for construction of a volleyball arena on the campus of Southern Mississippi. Now, how is Brett Favre involved in that? Well, Brett Favre is one of the most distinguished University of Southern Mississippi products. And at the time that this all went on, 4 and 5 years ago, Favre's daughter, Breely, was a volleyball player at the university, and he was very interested in helping the volleyball program at Mississippi. So, Anna Wolfe, I appreciate you joining me. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.
Okay, so Anna, let's just start by going to a very current event. Last Thursday, one of the top state officials in the welfare agency in the state of Mississippi was further embroiled in this scandal when this person named John Davis was essentially brought further into this scandal by pleading guilty to several charges. And I want to know, let's just update it and let's start with the more current events involving John Davis and how that gets more to the heart of this matter.
Sure. So John Davis pled guilty on Thursday to both federal and state charges. He's been facing state charges for the last 2.5 years related to his role in this welfare scandal. And again, this is the misspending of at least $77 million, according to forensic auditors. Of course, the amount that is determined to be theft or a criminal matter is a much smaller number, but he was charged back in 2020 with funneling money to a former professional wrestler. Actually, there are more sports figures than just Brett Favre in this story. And he finally pled guilty on Thursday to state charges related to money that he funneled to that wrestler and to send him to drug rehab, actually, in Malibu. He also pled guilty to new federal charges that relate to money that he gave not to this wrestler, but actually his brother. And both of these wrestlers are the sons of the famed WWE wrestler Ted the $1 Million Man DiBiase, which I'm sure many of your listeners are familiar with. So his charges,
I'm not, but maybe they are.
I wasn't before this, but I've certainly gotten an education on the WWE here. But his charges, it's important to note, do not relate to schemes related to Brett Favre and or the former governor. This story has really taken off here lately because of information about communication that the former governor Phil Bryant had with Brett Favre about these projects before they received welfare funds. So it is important to note that John Davis did not plead guilty to charges related to those projects, but as the welfare director, which is an appointment by the former governor, and the agency, the Department of Human Services, is overseen by the governor's office. It's important to make the note that he essentially predictably has the most direct information about the former governor's involvement in the direction of these funds. And so it is a turning of the case because it signals that he is going to be cooperating with investigators. And after his plea hearing, the DA in Hinds County actually said that this signals that investigators and prosecutors are, in his words, moving up the ladder. And so that is significant language in terms of, who knows what, and what does John Davis know about figures who would have been higher up on the chain than him, which points to former Governor Phil Bryant and Brett Favre.
So the way that this started, as I understand it, and please correct me if I'm wrong, because this comes from your reporting, that 5 years ago, July 2017, John Davis, who is the head of the Department of Human Services at the time, basically green lights informally $4 million from state welfare agency funds to go to building a volleyball arena on the campus of the University of Southern Mississippi. I may be slightly wrong in that, and if I am, please correct me. But what is it that it just sounds so incredible that anybody would say, oh yeah, let's use state welfare funds to build an athletic facility? What was this all about?
So there is kind of a chicken or the egg question here about, did they start manipulating this fund in order to appease Brett Favre, or had they already been manipulating the fund, and then Brett Favre comes in and asks for money and they already know where to go, right? And so when Brett Favre started approaching people, I know that he was going to private donors, but also the state of Mississippi to get funds for this project that he wanted to see come to fruition in Mississippi, this new volleyball stadium. He went to these state officials, and there was a meeting at the university with John Davis and also this nonprofit founder, Nancy New, to which the welfare agency was funneling tens of millions of these federal dollars for her nonprofit to be able to spend outside of public view, right? That's an important point. And so how they ended up meeting together, I think we're still trying to build that timeline out, were there conversations with the governor prior to this? But certainly it's a little hard to believe that the head of this welfare department, again, an agency under the governor's office, would just verbally commit $4 million in welfare money to this project without knowing that his boss was on board with it, right? And so after this verbal agreement comes, and by the way, this federal fund, Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, the reason that they knew that they could target this fund for this kind of project is because the federal regulations around this fund are so lax. States essentially get this money from the federal government every year, and they don't have to give it out to people through direct cash assistance, as the program is most commonly known for, the welfare check, right? They were denying, prior to this, they were denying up to 99% of people who were applying for this program. And so that created a scenario where they were still getting all this money and they basically had it to spend. They weren't giving it out to needy families. And so they knew that they could kind of skirt around the federal regulations in order to make this project work, because the federal government wasn't paying attention. The federal government wasn't requiring the state to provide any documentation of what they were doing with the money, like how they were actually spending it and who they were serving. And so when Brett Favre comes up with this idea of this project he wants to get done, the officials know that they can manipulate this fund in order to appease him. And so after that initial commitment is made from John Davis, that's when you see the communication where Phil Bryant and Nancy New and Brett Favre are all communicating about how to get the ball rolling on actually funneling the money, actually making the payments happen from the Department of Human Services to this nonprofit to the athletic foundation that built the facility.
I found myself thinking when I was reading your reporting, what would have happened if John Smith, private citizen from Hattiesburg, Mississippi, approached the state and said, I'd like to get $4 million in funding to build a volleyball arena at the University of Southern Mississippi, versus Brett Favre saying, I'd like to get $4 million for this stadium at Southern Miss. Anna, it was almost, in reading your reporting, like there were a lot of fanboys in the state governor going all the way up to the governor's office that, hey, we get to hang out with Brett Favre, and hey, we get to converse and be able to try to do him a solid and all that. I might be going too far in that, but is there a cult of celebrity in the state of Mississippi that might have led to some of this?
You're not going too far at all. I think that's exactly on the nose. I mean, we've talked a little bit throughout this process of how the story of this entire welfare scheme has only been publicized nationally because of Brett Favre's name. I mean, our obsession with celebrity nationally, it is the way that this story has been told nationally is sort of, from the same, it's the same issue that got us in this situation in the first place, right?
Right.
Yeah, we exalt celebrity, we exalt athletes in particular here in Mississippi. We're kind of like ranked 50th in everything good, but one of the things that we do really well is we produce a lot of great athletes. And so those are kind of the people in the state that we exalt. And I think that you saw exactly that when Brett Favre reached out to them, they were more than willing to help, and as a way to get close to them. There were messages at one point where, while they were trying to find a way to get more money from the welfare department to the volleyball facility in about 2019, he was texting with John Davis and Nancy New, and he sent a text to Nancy that said, I love John so much, and you. And you think about like what kind of feelings that generated in those people who held the purse strings, for the state, and the fact that Brett Favre was telling them that he loved them, right? There were text messages at one point that talked about Brett Favre was talking with another business associate about buying John a really nice truck, or buying, vehicles, or giving gifts to these people in exchange for their help. And so that was kind of the way that they talked about it. And it's kind of it's the good old boy system on full display, but just with, higher, more high profile characters than you might imagine.
I wonder sometimes if you, in your reporting, have thought of, I know at one point you actually went to see the nearly finished construction of the volleyball arena and the beach volleyball facility right next door. And I wonder if you had thoughts while you did this of, look at all this money that was spent here, and look at all the people in this state who could have used this money. Does that thought ever occur to you?
Of course. So when we went down there to Hattiesburg in 2020, we actually broke the story about the $5 million that went to the volleyball stadium. We knew about it, even before the auditor's office had reported it. And so we went down there to go to the facility. It's interesting too, the beach volleyball courts were being worked on while we went down there. The volleyball facility, the nice building, was virtually complete. Brett Favre's daughter had actually switched from the regular volleyball team to the beach volleyball team at this point. And so then you see them starting to work on the beach volleyball courts. It's kind of, telling. But one thing we did, besides just going to the campus and looking at the facility, was we went out to different service organizations and just out in the community, different little tiny bodegas, and walking around seeing who was, outside, and talk to people about what they would have liked to have seen done with $5 million, right? We talked to a woman who was sort of standing outside her house. Across from her house was an abandoned building. And she was like, how many, homeless shelters or places that like community centers that we could have built with that funding, or, facilitated some programming that would have actually helped people. These people are not going over to the campus at USM in the middle of campus to the state-of-the-art volleyball facility to get services, right? We talked to a lot of people who had tried to go to the local community action agency. That these are federally funded agencies that provide like rental assistance or energy assistance, to get your light bill paid. We talked to one guy who didn't have running water in his house and hadn't for a while because he had tried to go to that organization, and they said they didn't have anything for him or they couldn't help him. We talked to another guy who had his child taken away like 5 years prior to this, and he was homeless at the time, and he was trying to get he was trying to get rental assistance so that he could get his child back from CPS, and they told him that they didn't have any programs for him or any money available for him.
So there's a reason why you get emotional talking about this, and it's very simply because for some reason the money that's supposed to be used to help the neediest people in Mississippi has oftentimes been used. I don't know, maybe it's wrong to say this, but it's almost like it's being used to help the rich rather than being used to help the poor. And that must be part of the motivation for why you do the job that you do.
Yeah, before I took over this beat at Mississippi Today, my beat is poverty. I was working as the healthcare reporter for the statewide newspaper, and that was a beat that I cared a lot about. But it seemed like all of the time I was running into stories where, it's a healthcare story, but at the root cause is this poverty question and this economic issue and unfairness and inequity in the state. And no one was writing about poverty at the time. So I really wanted to dig in and focus on that. And that led me just very simply, there's a whole world, around why poverty exists that is beyond just DHS, the Department of Human Services, and federal safety net programs. But I thought I could at least start here, and in trying to just find out if the ways that we were administering these programs were effective for people in poverty. That's what led to all of these discoveries.
Do you think that poverty in Mississippi, and one of the reasons why these funds get abused, is because people all over the country in various needy areas, many people who control the purse strings sort of look at it as white noise? And this has existed for a long time. It's going to exist for a long time. We can't fix it. We can't do anything. So let's do some things, but let's not really try to fix the entire problem. And that must strike me as exceedingly frustrating when you start to uncover it.
Yeah, absolutely. What we saw within the spending of these welfare funds was that the state was determining how to spend the money based on their ideology and philosophy about people living in poverty. So there is this idea out there that providing direct resources to people creates dependency on the government, right? And I think that there are lots of legitimate conversations to be had about what the most effective way to solve poverty is, or like what is the government's role here? And I think we should have those conversations. But I think everyone, no matter what you think about anti-poverty programs and what the state's role should be, I think everyone can agree that public money that is supposed to be used to solve poverty going to volleyball stadiums and concussion research firms, that was another company that Brett Favre sponsored that received welfare money, luxury vehicles and fancy hotel stays. It doesn't matter what letter comes after your name. If you're politically affiliated, everyone can agree that that's wrong.
And two other things. Number one, what legally could happen to Brett Favre? I think everyone now understands the parameters of the story, and whether he is found guilty or not guilty in regard to any of these things, what is he facing legally, and what could happen to Favre throughout all this?
So, the FBI is still investigating, and we're still waiting to see what they end up uncovering and who they end up attempting to hold accountable. But the volleyball stadium purchase in particular is significant because it has already resulted in a criminal charge for someone in this matter. So Nancy New's son actually is the one who has pleaded guilty to defrauding the government related to this money that he put in the volleyball stadium, but also disguised as a payment that was supposed to be a lease payment. The way that they made this happen was that the nonprofit entered a $5 million lease with the athletic foundation down there, basically saying that they were leasing the property that they were going to use to provide programming to people in poverty, which most people looking at that agreement can tell is pretty thin. But in the plea agreement, it says that he coordinated and worked at the direction and with the support of others who are unnamed in the plea agreement. And so there are other people who facilitated that payment, who made that deal happen, who sort of orchestrated this workaround to the federal regulations. And we're just waiting to see who that is. And again, the DA said after John Davis's plea hearing that they were going to move up the ladder. And, up the ladder is his boss, Phil Bryant, who was the one communicating with Brett Favre about making this deal happen.
So it's uncertain right now how deep how deep the charges could be against Favre.
That's right. I mean, it's hard for me to say whether someone committed a crime or not based on what level of involvement they had in what has been determined to be a crime. It's not really for me to say, but we do know that the feds are continuing to investigate. And this latest news about John Davis pleading guilty, it only kind of furthers that that investigation and the ability for them to, receive testimony that helps their case.
Finally, what has this done? What has this story done, do you think, to Brett Favre's reputation in the state? And what are people you talk to saying right now about Favre?
The primary reaction is that people are not surprised. Brett Favre, unfortunately, has a reputation of being kind of a cheapskate. And so if he's going to find support for a project, he's probably going to get the funding from somewhere else rather than pay for it himself. He's also been tied to other kinds of unsavory schemes. There was a pain cream pharmaceutical compounding scheme that he was tied to. He was never charged within it, but it was a hundreds of millions of dollars scheme that people are, going to prison for down in Hattiesburg that he was tangentially tied to. Of course, about the scandal with the text messages, photos to the woman on the cheerleading team. And, these things that it fits in line with what he's being accused of now.
Anna, what do you hope to see come out of this for both the state of Mississippi and for needy people in the state?
If this story isn't an argument for welfare reform on the national level, I don't know what is. Ultimately this occurred because the money that we got to solve poverty in Mississippi was, had so few strings attached and so little accountability over it. At this point, the state has basically trusted that this new director of the agency is cleaning it up. There haven't been any new laws created to address this issue. There hasn't been any new regulations or requirements for the department to, for example, report back to state officials about how they are solving poverty. So is that money actually resulting in outcomes for people in poverty? Are they getting jobs? Are they increasing their pay? Like, what's happening to them after they leave this program? There still isn't any data being collected on that to suggest that we're using these funds in the most effective way possible. And I think that that can come on the state level. We're not in a state that really prioritizes those kinds of policies, but those policies could be enacted on the federal level as well. And now that the story is getting national attention, I think one of the biggest takeaways that we can get from it is the desperate need for reform in these public safety net programs.
Anna, do you have any idea about a timetable about either as it relates to further charges, either for the former governor, Phil Bryant, or obviously for what our audience would be interested in, Brett Favre?
It's hard to say. I think the ball is really moving now. The Biden administration has just nominated a U.S. attorney for this district, who will inherit the case. That position has been vacant for about 2 years. And so there hasn't been a U.S. attorney to really, emphasize this case and this investigation. So I think you're going to see the ball rolling for that reason. And then also John Davis's tentative sentencing date is in February of 2023. So, he's not going to be sentenced until the prosecutors are comfortable or satisfied with as much cooperation as he's given. Nancy New, similarly, who pled guilty back in April, is not going to be sentenced until the investigation is, near completion. So I don't think we're going to necessarily be seeing anything before early next year, 2023, but that could change.
Anna Wolfe, thanks so much for your time today. And more importantly, thanks so much for your reporting on a vital issue.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.